The sun peeked over the dashboard, warming Sarah's hands on the steering wheel. Beside her, Mr. Davis, a man old enough to be her, well, she wasn't quite sure what, sat perfectly still. He was always so serious. They were hours into a road trip, the kind where the scenery blurs into streaks of green and brown. Sarah was driving her mom's old station wagon, affectionately nicknamed the Whale because of its size and tendency to sway on curves. The Whale wasn't fancy, but it had character, just like Sarah. Mr. Davis wasn't like that. He was all crisp button-down shirts and quiet observations. He'd offered to pay for gas, a very grown-up thing to do. Sarah had agreed quickly, seeing it as a good deal. The radio played softly, a mix of pop songs and classic rock. Sarah hummed along, tapping her fingers on the wheel, while Mr. Davis stared out the window, his brow slightly furrowed. He looked like he was solving a very important math problem. Maybe he was. He was a professor, after all. Sarah glanced at him, a quick, playful peek. He didn't notice. The highway stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt, promising adventure, or at least a change of scenery. She decided to make things a little more interesting. The Whale lurched slightly as Sarah decided the right lane wasn't exciting enough. She zipped over to the left, just to pass a minivan with a family waving cheerfully. It wasn't really necessary, but it felt fun. She checked her mirrors, of course, but more like a suggestion than a rule. Mr. Davis didn't say anything, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her. She risked another glance, a quick smile playing on her lips. He remained impassive. Was he judging her driving? Probably. Another lane change, this time to get a better look at a shiny red convertible. Nice car, she commented, more to break the silence than anything else. She sped up, matching the convertible's pace for a moment, then slowed back down, cutting in front of it just a little too close for comfort. Sarah giggled, a nervous little sound. She knew she was pushing it, but something about Mr. Davis's quiet disapproval made her want to push even harder. It was like a game, a silent challenge. How far could she go before he said something? How much could she get away with? She knew it wasn't the safest way to drive, but it was definitely the most interesting. She glanced at Mr. Davis again, a playful question in her eyes. Mr. Davis was a study in composure. Where Sarah was all energy and impulsive decisions, he was a rock, solid and unyielding. His hands rested calmly in his lap, not gripping the dashboard like most people would in the Whale. His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, even when Sarah's antics threatened to send them careening into a ditch. He hadn't said a word about her driving, but his silence spoke volumes. It was a quiet disapproval, a subtle tightening of his lips, a barely perceptible shake of his head when she cut someone off. He was a man of few words, but his expressions were a language all their own. Sarah wondered what he was thinking. Did he think she was a terrible driver? Probably. Did he regret agreeing to this trip? Maybe. Was he secretly enjoying the chaos? That was the question she really wanted answered. He was so different from her usual friends. They would have been egging her on, laughing at her near misses. But Mr. Davis just sat there, a silent observer, a judge and jury all rolled into one neatly dressed package. It was unnerving, but also intriguing. It made her want to break through his carefully constructed wall of composure, to see what lay beneath the surface. She just needed the right opportunity. The sign flashed by in a blur of green and white, exit 42, scenic overlook, 1 mile. Sarah had been so focused on Mr. Davis's reaction, or lack thereof, that she completely missed it. By the time she registered what the sign said, it was too late. Oops, she mumbled, belatedly hitting the brakes. Guess I missed our turn. Mr. Davis finally spoke, his voice calm but with a definite edge. Yes, you did. That was the exit I specifically told you to watch for. Sarah winced. He was right. He had pointed it out on the map before they left, and again just a few minutes ago. She'd been too busy trying to provoke him to pay attention. Sorry, she repeated, lamely. She pulled onto the shoulder of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. I can turn around at the next exit. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Sarah knew she'd messed up. It wasn't just a missed turn, it was a symbol of her carelessness, her flippant attitude. She'd been so busy playing games that she'd forgotten they were actually supposed to be going somewhere. The missed turn forced the interaction and showcased her distracted behavior. The silence hung heavy in the air. Sarah fidgeted, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. She needed to say something, anything, to break the tension. "Guess I'm just distracted," she started, letting the words trail off. Then, she plunged in, "Maybe by you." It was out there now, the explicit flirtation she'd been hinting at all along. She held her breath, watching Mr. Davis's face for any sign of reaction. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker. He simply stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. It was as if she hadn't spoken at all. Was he completely immune to her charms? Or was he just really good at hiding his feelings? She decided to push further, needing to see some sort of response. "Oh, and I turned 18 yesterday," she added, as casually as she could manage. Still nothing. His silence was a wall, impenetrable and frustrating. The air in the car felt thick, charged with unspoken words and unacknowledged tension. Sarah wondered if she'd gone too far. Maybe she had. But she couldn't take it back now. The game had changed. Sarah's casual mention of her birthday wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a calculated move, a way to test the waters, to see how he would react to the revelation of her age. The fact that he remained silent only amplified the discomfort. 18. It was a boundary, a line crossed from being a minor to a legal adult. It changed everything, or at least, it was supposed to. But Mr. Davis's lack of response made her question whether it changed anything at all in their dynamic. The silence screamed of unspoken implications. Was he thinking about the age difference? Was he reevaluating the entire trip? Was he feeling awkward, guilty, or something else entirely? Sarah couldn't tell. The "I turned 18 yesterday" line hung in the air like a fragile ornament, threatening to shatter at any moment. It added a layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. It introduced the possibility of consequences, of judgment, of something more than just a playful game. Sarah had upped the stakes, and now she had to wait and see if she'd just ruined everything. The atmosphere shifted, the car felt smaller, the road longer. The playful mood that had characterized the first part of the drive evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. It was like a switch had been flipped. The air in the car felt heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah could no longer hum along to the radio. The music, once a background melody, now felt intrusive, a jarring reminder of the light-hearted atmosphere they'd lost. She turned it down, the silence amplifying the awkwardness. Every glance she stole at Mr. Davis felt like a violation. He remained a statue, his gaze fixed on the road, his face unreadable. But Sarah sensed a shift in him, a subtle tightening of his posture, a barely perceptible clenching of his jaw. The unease was palpable. It clung to them like a damp cloth, making it difficult to breathe. The carefree feeling of the open road was gone, replaced by a heavy weight of unspoken words and potential regret. Sarah desperately wanted to rewind the last few minutes, to unsay what she had said, to go back to the simpler dynamic they had before. But it was too late. The playful game had ended, and something much more complicated had begun. Inside Mr. Davis's head, a storm was brewing. He stared straight ahead, but his mind raced. He questioned his decision to invite Sarah on this trip. What had he been thinking? He'd imagined it as a harmless outing, a chance to share his love of the scenic overlooks with a bright young student. Now, it felt like a colossal mistake. He was a professor, a man of intellect and reason. He wasn't equipped to handle this. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, the flirtatious tone, the casual mention of her newfound adulthood. He felt a wave of discomfort, a sense of crossing a line he hadn't even realized was there. He was conflicted. He couldn't deny that he found Sarah engaging, her energy and spirit a refreshing contrast to the often stuffy atmosphere of the university. But now, that engagement felt dangerous. He wrestled with his thoughts, trying to find a way to salvage the situation, to steer the conversation back to safer territory. He needed to re-establish the boundaries, to make it clear that their relationship was strictly professional. But how? He was so used to being in control, to having all the answers. Now, he felt lost, adrift in a sea of awkwardness and uncertainty. He just wanted this drive to be over. The landscape outside the car window began to mirror their internal turmoil. The sunny, open fields had given way to a dense forest, the trees looming tall and dark on either side of the road. The sky, once a bright blue, was now overcast, the sun hidden behind a thick layer of gray clouds. The road narrowed, winding its way through the increasingly isolated terrain. There were fewer cars, fewer signs of civilization. The feeling of being alone, just the two of them, intensified. The trees seemed to press in on the car, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. Shadows danced across the road, creating an unsettling effect. The cheerful, inviting scenery of the morning had been replaced by something more ominous, more foreboding. Even the colors seemed muted, the vibrant greens and browns dulled by the lack of sunlight. The world outside felt cold and unwelcoming, reflecting the chill that had settled inside the car. The scenic route had become a path through a wilderness, both literal and emotional. They were lost, not just geographically, but also in their understanding of each other. The landscape served as a constant, visual reminder of the growing distance between them. After a long stretch of silence, Mr. Davis finally spoke, his voice measured and carefully controlled. "Turning 18 is a significant milestone, Sarah. It comes with new freedoms, but also new responsibilities." Sarah bit back a sarcastic response. A lecture on responsibility was the last thing she wanted to hear right now. "Yeah, I know," she mumbled, keeping her eyes on the road. He continued, oblivious to her lack of enthusiasm. "It's important to be mindful of your choices, to consider the consequences of your actions." Sarah decided to push back, to break through his platitudes and force him to acknowledge the elephant in the room. "So, what consequences are you thinking about, Mr. Davis?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. "The missed turn? Or something else?" He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched again, even more uncomfortable than before. Sarah could feel his gaze on her, assessing, evaluating. Finally, he sighed. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer now, "I think we should just focus on getting to the overlook safely." It was a deflection, a retreat. He wasn't going to engage. Sarah felt a surge of frustration. He was going to pretend like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just laid her feelings bare. Fine. She could play that game too. The tension remained, simmering beneath the surface of their stilted conversation. Was she really attracted to Mr. Davis? Sarah wasn't entirely sure herself. He was different from anyone she'd ever dated. Older, obviously, but also intriguing. It wasn't just about looks, it was about the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence, the air of intelligence. But maybe it was just a game. A way to alleviate the boredom of the road trip, a way to test her own power. She knew she was good at getting attention, at pushing boundaries. Mr. Davis, with his stoic demeanor, presented a unique challenge. Could she crack his composure? Could she make him reveal something, anything, beneath the surface? Part of her felt a genuine curiosity about him. She wanted to know what made him tick, what he thought about, what he felt. But another part of her was simply enjoying the thrill of the chase, the adrenaline rush of pushing the limits. Maybe it was a combination of both. A little bit of genuine attraction mixed with a whole lot of playful manipulation. Whatever it was, she knew she had to be careful. She had opened a door, and she wasn't sure what was on the other side. She needed to decide whether to keep pushing forward or to retreat before things got too complicated. The thrill was still there, but so was a growing sense of unease. Mr. Davis's life was one of routine and order. He'd spent years immersed in academia, finding solace in the predictable patterns of research and teaching. He was a man who appreciated structure, who found comfort in the familiar. So, what had possessed him to invite Sarah on this trip? He'd told himself it was purely academic. She was a bright student, eager to learn, and he genuinely wanted to share his passion for the history and beauty of the local scenic overlooks. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. He was drawn to her energy, her vitality, her refusal to conform. She was a breath of fresh air in his otherwise staid existence. He'd hoped the trip would be a chance to connect with that energy, to feel a spark of something new. His intentions had been innocent, or so he'd believed. He'd never considered that Sarah might interpret his interest as anything other than academic. Now, he was forced to confront the possibility that he had miscalculated, that his actions had sent the wrong signal. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. He just knew he needed to tread carefully, to avoid any further missteps. His reputation, his career, and perhaps even Sarah's well-being, depended on it. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's hands were clammy on the steering wheel. The silence was getting to her. She felt Mr. Davis's eyes on her, judging her every move. She gripped the wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road, but her mind was racing. Suddenly, a deer darted out from the trees, crossing the road directly in front of the car. Sarah gasped, slamming on the brakes. The whale screeched, tires squealing, and swerved slightly, narrowly missing the deer, which bounded off into the woods. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "Wow," she said, her voice shaky. "That was close." Mr. Davis said nothing, but she could feel his disapproval radiating off him. The near miss only amplified the tension in the car. It was a stark reminder of the potential consequences of her distraction, of her recklessness. She had almost caused an accident, and it was all her fault. The playful flirting, the testing of boundaries, it all seemed so foolish now. She just wanted to get to the overlook, to get this trip over with. The deer incident had shaken her, not just because of the near accident, but because of the palpable fear she had sensed from Mr. Davis. She had scared him, and that realization stung more than she expected. After the near miss with the deer, the silence stretched on, heavier than ever. Finally, Mr. Davis cleared his throat. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious but gentle, "I think we need to address something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he continued, "but I want to be clear about the nature of our relationship. I am your professor, and you are my student. This trip is intended to be an educational experience, and I want to ensure that we both maintain appropriate boundaries." He avoided looking directly at her, focusing instead on the passing trees. "I value your intelligence and your perspective, and I enjoy our discussions. However, I am not comfortable with personal comments. I hope you understand." It was a gentle rebuke, a carefully worded attempt to set things straight. He wasn't angry, but he was firm. He was drawing a line in the sand, making it clear that he wasn't going to reciprocate her flirtations. He then changed the subject abruptly. "Tell me more about your research on the local flora," he said, his voice regaining its usual academic tone. "I'm particularly interested in your findings on the impact of acid rain on the pine forests." It was a blatant attempt to steer the conversation away from personal topics, to return to the safer ground of academia. Sarah felt a sting of embarrassment, followed by a surge of defiance. Part of her wanted to shrink into the seat, to apologize profusely and promise to behave. But another part of her wanted to lash out, to challenge his authority, to push even harder against the boundaries he had just set. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Okay," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I understand." But did she? Was she truly understanding, or was she just biding her time, waiting for another opportunity to break through his defenses? She wasn't sure. She could feel a flicker of anger simmering beneath the surface. He had rejected her, albeit politely, and that rejection stung. But she also recognized a certain respect for his honesty, for his willingness to address the awkwardness directly. She decided to play along, at least for now. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, then launched into a detailed explanation of her research on the local flora, focusing on the scientific aspects and avoiding any personal anecdotes. She was determined to prove to him that she was capable of being professional, that she could engage in an intelligent conversation without resorting to flirtation. But a small part of her couldn't resist adding, with a subtle smile, "It's fascinating stuff, really. Almost as fascinating as human interactions." The challenge was still there, just beneath the surface. As Sarah meticulously explained the chemical processes behind acid rain's damage to the pine needles, she stumbled over a particularly complicated term. She paused, searching for the right word. Mr. Davis, despite his earlier sternness, offered a gentle correction. "Isomerization," he supplied, his lips twitching slightly. Sarah's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. "Right, isomerization," she repeated, feeling a little foolish. "I always get that one mixed up." Then, she added, "Maybe if I had turned 18 before taking organic chemistry, I would remember it better." It was a subtle jab, a reminder of the earlier awkwardness, but it was delivered with a self-deprecating smile. To her surprise, Mr. Davis chuckled. It was a brief, almost hesitant sound, but it was genuine. "Perhaps," he conceded, a twinkle in his eye. "But I suspect even a seasoned chemist would struggle with that particular term." For a moment, the tension in the car dissipated. They were just two people, sharing a laugh over a shared experience. It was a brief connection, a fleeting moment of understanding that transcended the awkwardness and the boundaries. It was a reminder that beneath the surface of their complicated dynamic, there was still a foundation of mutual respect and intellectual curiosity. The moment passed quickly, but it lingered in the air, a small spark of warmth in the otherwise chilly atmosphere. As they drove further, the signs indicating the scenic overlook became more frequent. "Scenic overlook, 2 miles," one sign read. "Scenic overlook, next right," announced another. The end of the drive was rapidly approaching, and with it, the need to confront the unresolved tension that hung between them. Sarah glanced at Mr. Davis. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. Was he relieved that the trip was almost over? Or was he regretting the entire experience? She couldn't tell. She felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The destination, which had once seemed like a distant goal, now loomed large, a symbol of the decisions they would have to make, the paths they would have to choose. The air in the car felt thick with unspoken words, with questions that couldn't be asked, with feelings that couldn't be expressed. The brief moment of connection they had shared over the chemistry term felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the weight of their earlier interactions. The overlook was a point of no return. Once they arrived, they would have to decide what came next. Would they pretend that nothing had happened? Would they acknowledge the awkwardness and try to move on? Or would they simply part ways, their relationship forever changed? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. The silence in the car became almost deafening. It was a silence filled with unspoken thoughts, with regrets that couldn't be voiced, with possibilities that would never be explored. Every breath, every rustle of clothing, seemed amplified, magnified by the oppressive quiet. Sarah stole another glance at Mr. Davis. His face was still turned towards the window, his expression unreadable. But she could sense a weariness in him, a subtle slump in his shoulders that spoke volumes. She wondered if he regretted inviting her on this trip. She wondered if he wished he could rewind the clock, erase the last few hours, and start over. She certainly did. The scenic overlook was just around the corner, and the silence grew heavier with each passing moment. It was a silence that held the weight of their unspoken feelings, the weight of their complicated dynamic, the weight of their uncertain future. Sarah wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension. But the words caught in her throat, trapped by the fear of saying the wrong thing, of making the situation even worse. She was trapped in a silent prison of her own making, and the end of the drive offered no escape, only the daunting prospect of facing the consequences of her actions. The potential for regret hung heavy in the air, a suffocating cloud that threatened to consume them both. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the scenic overlook. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of rolling hills and distant mountains. But neither of them seemed to notice. She turned off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the awkwardness. "Well, here we are," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Davis nodded, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. He didn't say anything. After a moment, he opened the car door and stepped out. "Thank you for driving, Sarah," he said, his tone polite but distant. "You're welcome," she replied, equally formal. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but then seemed to change his mind. "I'll see you in class," he said, finally. "Yeah, see you," Sarah replied, trying to sound nonchalant, even though her heart was pounding. He turned and walked towards the overlook, his back stiff and unyielding. Sarah watched him go, a mix of relief and disappointment swirling within her. The goodbye was brief, awkward, and utterly ambiguous. Had she ruined everything? Or was there still a chance for them to salvage their relationship, to move past the awkwardness and find a way to connect on a deeper level? The future remained uncertain, shrouded in a fog of unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Sarah sat in the car for a long moment, watching Mr. Davis as he stood at the overlook, gazing out at the view. He looked small and lonely against the vast landscape. She wondered what he was thinking. Did he regret the entire trip? Did he think she was a terrible person? She replayed the events of the day in her mind, cringing at her own behavior. She had been reckless, impulsive, and selfish. She had pushed too far, crossed too many boundaries. She had jeopardized her relationship with a professor she respected, and for what? A fleeting moment of excitement, a silly game of flirtation. She started the car, a sense of regret washing over her. She had a lot to think about. Meanwhile, Mr. Davis stood at the overlook, taking in the breathtaking view. But his mind wasn't on the scenery. He was replaying the car ride in his own head, questioning his decisions, analyzing his actions. Had he handled the situation correctly? Had he been too harsh, too distant? Or had he been too lenient, too encouraging? He wasn't sure. He knew that things would never be the same between him and Sarah. The boundaries had been crossed, the trust had been broken. But perhaps, with time and effort, they could find a way to rebuild their relationship, to move forward with a new understanding of each other. He also had a lot to think about. The implications of their interactions would weigh on them both for some time to come.